Hi everyone, Author Alice Brown and Lady V here. Today we are bringing you a special video on our favorite authors. Long before we were published authors,
we were book collectors.
We were book collectors and book readers, prolific book readers. And we thought we'd take today to go over some of our favorites, what got us started in the whole paranormal world to begin with, and some other good favorites. So, Lady V, I'm gonna let you start.
Oh, you're gonna let me start? You have a bigger stack, but okay. So let's start off with where credit is actually due for getting into writing vampires, even though it's a little cringy to admit that I still absolutely love this series, but it is the Twilight Saga. It's not staying still. The Twilight Saga from Stephenie Meyer. Book one is to this day still my favorite because this was the first vampire series I was ever allowed to read. I was still a teenager when I started getting into reading and writing about vampires. So the risque and your paranormal romance that was sold in the bookstores, she didn't really want to corrupt my mind quite yet. So I started off with Twilight. I started off with Twilight and fell in love with vampires and romance this way. And so I have to give credit where credit is due with them being the first set of vampire novels that got me to write paranormal.
I remember me reading these books out loud to you.
Yes.
Just give us something to do. We both wanted to read them, and so I just read them out loud the first time around.
Yes, she took me to see the movie first, and then we bought the entire book series, and she read each book to me out loud in the evenings after school, so make sure school was already done with, and it was like a treat to be able to be read to by the books. So she wanted to read them too, and it was just, to kill two birds with one stone. She would read them aloud to me. And that was quite the adventure in my teenage years.
Yeah, we used to have family reading time back when you were younger, where we would sit down in the evenings and I'd read out loud whatever book we were working on.
And to this day, these books are still really big and hard for me to handle.
So what else do we have?
What else do we have? We have my next favorite author for YA, and that is Alex Flynn. The first book I read was Beastly. Again, it was a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and every retelling of Beauty and the Beast out there, I pretty much own on my Kindle or in paperback. And I read this in like 3 days. I was that engorged in it. I loved it. I love how she, in this book, went through and they read together. That was how they bonded. And so she would put in classic titles and authors, and I would sit there with a notepad while reading and jot down those authors, and I would go look those up. And quite a few of my favorite classic authors came from reading this and being introduced to so many different people and different authors and books through this. And then the second one that I ended up falling in love with immediately after was Cloaked, which is, I believe, a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, I think. If I'm not mistaken, that one was Sleeping Beauty. But definitely fell in love with Beastly.
Okay.
That was actually one of the few that I read the book and then watched the movie. Most of the time I try to watch the movie and then read the book, which I know is backwards to everybody else. But I watch the movie, so I will like the movie and then I read the books. So that way I don't read the books and then hate the movie because it's not like the books at all.
Yeah, well, when they do movie adaptations, they leave so much out. We saw that with the whole Harry Potter series. There was so much detail that was left out.
So I tend to do that backwards just because I like movies and I would like to like the movies, and then that way I can also like the movie and the book. So.
All right, what else we have?
The next series we have is Percy Jackson. I am a sucker for mythology and mythology retellings, and my dad and I both got into this series about the same time. This was like his and mine, one and only little read along that we had together. He was reading the books, and then I was reading the books, and he took me to see the movie for Percy Jackson after he had read the book. I hadn't read it yet, but he had just finished it, and I absolutely love this series. As you can see, the spines are a little worn and torn. They've been read many times. Next, I have a cozy mystery series that actually I have to give thanks to my grandmother for. She reads a lot of cozy mysteries, and she got me started on this series, the Stacy Justice Mysteries by Barbara Annino. And I absolutely love this. It is about witches, but they use a lot of like crystals and stuff. And since I like crystals and working with stones and stuff like that, it was something I was very much intrigued by, with the fact that they use stones for protection and all that stuff. It's not necessarily spells all the time. It's more healing abilities from nature objects. Okay. And I love that. So that I have to give thanks to my grandmother. I was listening to this series originally on Audible, and then she gifted me with the first five books in the series. Next on my list is Melissa Dela Cruz. I fell in love with The Queen's Assassin. As soon as I heard that that book was coming out, I literally went and bought it the day it came out. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it. I knew it was going to be a book that I loved. It reminded me similar to another book that I had read. It was only one book by the author, Dark Goddess, I believe is what it was. And it was so similar to that, and I loved it. And I happened to be at a bookstore one day with my fiance and didn't realize that this one had come out already, the sequel to The Queen's Assassin, and so I went ahead and picked it up. Not even reading about it, I just picked it up because I knew I loved the first one so much. Alright, I actually do have a few romances on my list. In paperback, but also on my Kindle. We have The Princess Bride, which is a tried and true throughout my family. My grandfather loves it, my fiance loves it, I absolutely love it. This one is definitely a family, well-loved book. And of course, I like this edition where it's got the little map of the whole area that's in the book and the movie. Absolutely love it. Another one that I have fallen in love with the first book, I have not gotten around to reading the rest of the series yet, is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. This is very good. Most people already know what this series is about. Time travel, romance, Scotland. How much more do you need?
Yeah.
I mean, right there. Really, how much more do you need?
Winner right there.
Now, this book has some good memories.
Yes, I remember that one, yes.
She read this one to me in school. This was about the time that we got finished reading Little House on the Prairie, and we decided to pick up something else. And I remember us going at the time to Barnes & Noble's trying to find some more of this book by Catherine Palmer, and they didn't have it. And I probably could go now that we had the glorious eBay out there, I probably could go out there and find the rest of the books for this series, but I remember falling in love with listening to this book when she read it to me when I was in school. So, this one holds a lot of true good memories to me. Also on that note that goes with that was the Love Comes Softly series by Jeanette Oke. Of course, I have several of the books in that series as well. And this,
we watched every one of those on movie too. I was so happy to see them
when Hallmark did the movies. We watched every movie, and of course they would add one.
We already had all the books by then. I'd already read them, and I think I read them to you too at that point.
And yeah, because that came pretty much. That was after Prairie Rose. Was Jeanette Oke came Prairie Rose, or Prairie Rose and then Jeanette Oke, and every year they would add a new movie on Hallmark to the series, the Love Comes Softly series, and so we would re-watch all the movies because they would have a marathon that day of all the Jeanette Oke movies of Love Comes Softly. So we would just sit down and then watch the new one when it came out. I absolutely loved that. That would be my school session for the fall when that would happen. It used to happen around Thanksgiving, I believe. Yeah, it was right before they put on all the Christmas movies, so I think it was Thanksgiving is when that happened. But I absolutely loved that series. Loved the movies, loved the books.
Very clean.
Yeah, definitely clean. Definitely clean. Nothing to worry about there if you want to get a young reader started on some romance, but also learn a little bit of history about back in those days. I would say that they're both very good for that. Another one, this one's more of a favorite book because I have read some others of hers that were a little just too gory, too a little bit graphic and gory for me, but Montana Sky was the first Nora Roberts book that I read and absolutely fell in love with.
Well, we fell in love with the movie. They did a movie adaptation to that and fell in love with it, and then had to go find the book after we watched the movie.
Yep. So this one has definitely been read several times. She started it, and then when I got old enough to read it, because there's a few words in here that you probably wouldn't want your 12-year-old reading, and so I was told to wait until I was a little older. And then I finally was able to read the book myself, and I loved it. This is one of the ones, along with like Beastly, that I have on every format. I have it in the paperback or hardback, I have it in Kindle, and I have it in Audible. That way, no matter where I'm at in my little world, I always have my favorite books with me. So, now for the classics, because the classics are where it's at. That was one of the things that I got started on my own in school. Being homeschooled, it was something, during those days we would travel back and forth. My dad worked several hours away with the National Guard, and so we would travel back and forth from our home to him just to go visit. And there was an Edward McKay's on the way that we would always stop at. Edward McKay's was a used bookstore where you could bring books in or other stuff. They would take video games and movies, and they would give you a credit to where you could go buy more books or video games or movies, whatever it was that you wanted to buy.
I think there's still a few open, but unfortunately they've
Most of them-
scaled back.
most
a lot
of them have
at
shut
least
down.
in this state, a lot of them have shut down.
But
So.
I took an interest having, read Beastly, and I had a list of these classic authors and books to check out. I had also picked up other titles here and there, that I really wanted to check out. And my mom at the time, she's like, I'm not sure if you're gonna like these or not, so let's go to a used bookstore where you can just pick up a couple. If you like them, we'll go back and pick up more. And boy, did I fall in love. I remember I picked up my first Shakespeare book there, and the first one, unlike most people who usually start with Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, several of those, Twelfth Night, mine was As You Like It. That was the first one I picked up, and to this day, this is still my favorite play from him. I absolutely adore this book. It was so cute. I read it in 2 days, which you wouldn't think somebody could read play for the first time that quickly, but I did. I absolutely fell in love with it. I stayed up day and night reading it. Loved it. That was my first introduction to Shakespeare, and loved it.
Good.
Next on my list is Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, another tried and true
Another
favorite.
tried and true favorite. I got introduced to Phantom of the Opera thanks to our little Scottish neighbor
Across the
who
street.
has passed on now. But every Sunday after she would watch Mass, because she was handicapped, she had to stay inside. After she would watch Mass, she would then put on Phantom of the Opera. And there were several times where I would go over and talk with her on Sundays, or just sit and watch the movie with her, and I fell in love with the movie, and I ended up reading the book. And both I love dearly. It is still to this day one of my favorites. And then my fiance, when I originally got with him, he learned from my love for Phantom of the Opera, and he took me on a date to see Phantom of the Opera, the play, in New York City, which was fantastic. I love that. Back to the vampires on the list, though, we have the tried and true Dracula. Definitely could not have done favorite books or authors without having to put Dracula on there.
Very true.
What would be a book haul for vampire authors if we did not put that? My next one is Little Women, which again was read to me in school, and then again I watched many movie adaptations of this. I have reread the book numerous times. It's one that I have on Audible. I love this book. It's it was one that I grew up with, I fell in love with about the same time of Jeanette Oak. This one my mom owned, and she did not know if I was actually going to like poetry, and I happened to find it cleaning out the bookcase one day.
Do you know where I bought that?
I do not know where you bought that.
Up in Williamsburg,
Did you?
Virginia. Yeah. If you remember, we went up there for a field trip one year when you were young, and I picked it up there.
I do not remember that. But anyways, this is Palgrave's Golden Treasury. It's a book full of poems. I have several bookmarks in here marking my favorate poems, and I just lost one.
Got lost.
Oh well, we'll find it again. I think it was here. This one has a nice little dent in it. So.
Okay.
Palgrave's Golden Treasury is my one and favorite book for poems. It has Shakespeare, it has Keats, Braun, everybody is in here, and I absolutely love it. Another one from my childhood that still today is in the house is Grimm Fairy Tales.
I remember.
Another one that has been read to me multiple times, and I found this edition, which is just so pretty. They've got the little ribbon bookmark, golden sprayed pages, make it look like it's a nice old-fashioned classic. I love this book. I think the first classic author that I ever read was Jane Austen. Jane Austen I fell in love with from watching Pride and Prejudice, the one with Keira Knightley. Was the first movie I watched, and I fell in love with it, and then I was introduced to Sense and Sensibility with Emma Thompson. And once I watched both of those, I was like, I've got to get the books. And I have read the books multiple times. They're both in well-loved, but not so great condition. They're definitely not mint anymore, but they are both my favorites. And as you can see, I have the actual movie cover editions because I love those. Those are my two favorites. Another one of my favorites that I got originally from Beastly is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now this one is very special to me. This one I received after my grandmother died on my mom's side, and also after my grandfather passed away on my dad's side. I did not know that my grandfather had gifted this to her, and I was very close to my grandfather. And so when I realized that it was passed from one side of the family to the other,
yeah,
and then I
bought
now
this book for her because she had trouble seeing.
Yes, it is
It's
large
in
print.
print.
It is very much
Yeah,
in large
he bought
print.
it because she either had to read large print or Audible, and of course back then Audible was
CDs
very,
and
very
cassettes.
hard to find. You could, very few books were in Audible form. It's not like it is today. You're talking, every bit of 15 to 18 years ago. So he bought her that. And,
So not only did it become my favorite through the story, but it became my favorite book physically because of the history that it held, going from my grandfather to my grandmother, and then next to me.
on opposite sides of the family.
On opposite sides of the family, and then it came back to me. Oh, love her for classic literature. And last on my physical book list that I have over here, we'll go to the paper list in a minute, is Edgar Allan Poe. I adore Edgar Allan Poe. And my favorite movie adaptations of his are all with Vincent Price. Love me some Vincent Price.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite two poems, though, are The Raven and The Pit and Pendulum. I absolutely love those two poems. Those are my favorites out of all of his. So, Edgar Allan Poe. All right, to finish up on my paper list, which is all the books that I have either on Audible or Kindle, is Vivian Aaron, which actually she got me started on. She is a wonderful paranormal romance writer. It's not too risque. It's actually very clean, the ones that I have read of hers. I don't know.
Some.
There are some. Okay.
There are some
I haven't
that
come
are
across those yet.
Pretty heated.
I haven't come across those yet. There's one. The first one that I read of hers was of a girl who couldn't speak. She was mute, and she fell in love with a wolf shifter. And I absolutely loved that. Mm-hmm. That was wonderful. Next was Amanda Ashley, which
excellent. That is still
this one again collected all of Amanda Ashley's.
I've got several of hers over here in paperback.
And we'll get more to that in a
minute.
Cynthia
Very clean writer too.
Yes,
she's a very clean writer.
Very clean. Cynthia Eden is another one. Now for her, I do prefer her paranormal ones. I have not really gotten into her normal romance, I guess is what you would call it. Her human romances. I prefer her paranormal ones. Just personal preference. Annie Nicholas is another one.
She put some pretty good comedy in
hers.
I've read several of hers.
The Not This and then the branch off series of the Vanguard, they both go together. And they are hysterical. Wonderful reads. Absolutely love it. The next one is Christine Pope. I fell in love with her. She had both done a rewriting of Beauty and the Beast and Phantom of the Opera, and honey, if you're going to do both of those, you're my favorite author no matter how good of a writer you are. You're my favorite author. But I did read both of those, and they were absolutely phenomenal. Alyssa Woods. I got on her, she does multiple different shifters. She does werewolves, she does werebears, and she does dragons. And I think the first one I read was a dragon, and the second one I read was the werebear. And she is a good writer. Very good. I love her books. Lynn Lettie. That is one
yes.
that I got hooked on by her. Thankfully, since we're mother-daughter, I have access to her Kindle. I keep it on my phone, which of course my phone is the camera right now, so I can't show you, but I have access to her Kindle through my phone. So I have my Kindle books on my actual iPad and then her Kindle books on my phone, which allows me to be able to check out authors. She's gotten me to check out Lynn Lettie, M.L. Bryars, Zoe Chant. I have fallen in love with many of those books. Yeah. There's way too many to be able to show you.
Well, Lynn Lettie has a couple different series, and what I really liked about it is they're all interconnected.
Yes.
They're all, you know, reading a series as a reader, I get tired of it after a while. You know, it grows so much, and to the point that I'm going, okay, this just feels like same story, different day. And I hate that feeling because then I get turned off of the series, and I don't like that. But with her, she'll take it and do, you know, maybe 6, maybe 8 books, and then she branches off into another series. But that series is connected to the first one, and it's excellent.
You still get the characters, but it's also a different
different
storyline.
Story. Yes, and she's done a wonderful. She's built a fantastic world with her werewolves, and there's a couple witches in there.
The other one that does that is Bianca d'Arc.
Yes,
she's very good at that,
and she's on my list too.
Okay, so we'll get to them in a minute. Yes, definitely. So, you know, Zoe Chant and Lynn Lettie, they're both on my list, but on her Kindle. I have to borrow them from her because she reads so much faster with the romances. I tend to read your science fiction and fantasy, so I tend to read heavier stuff than she does. So she flies through her romances. And, you know, she's like, you gotta read this, you gotta read this, you gotta read this. And I'm like 10 books behind in every series. Every romance series that she has ever recommended to me. Robert Masello is another one who tends to do a lot of your historical fiction, mostly on your classic authors, but there are a few. There's one that he's got out there that has to do with Medusa. There's several others. And I love how he definitely does the research for his books to put actual facts in there. But at the same time, there is a twist to it. The one I just recently finished was about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it was telling the story about Robert Louis Stevenson and how he actually, supposedly in this book, became Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because of a medicine that was given to him to try and help with his tuberculosis.
Ah, okay.
And then it ended up getting in the hands of his stepson, and his stepson then became the monster.
Oh.
Probably not actually really true, but I love the take that he put on it, and he put in so much history. He had Robert Louis Stevenson meeting Bram Stoker before Bram Stoker was an author, and I mean,
wow.
it was amazing. I absolutely loved it, and I listened to him on Audible because the detail that is in there, I almost feel like you have to listen to it on Audible to really just get absorbed in that world. It is fantastic. So definitely check him out.
I'll go into
Eva Langlis is another one on my list, but we'll definitely be going into more detail on her with her because she got me started on Eva Langlis as well.
She is another one. She puts comedy in her work. Her Lion's Pride is fantastic. I love her Lion's Pride, and she puts so much humor and comedy in it that it's very. She's a very.
There
good
was
writer.
A demon and his witch, or a witch and her demon. Whatever. I don't remember which way it was.
Series that she's
that
got
was
out
really
for
good.
that, yes.
And so this girl is working for the devil and falls in love with his son. I believe is how it goes. I think.
Yeah.
No, maybe not.
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
It's been a while since I read that. But it's another good series. Anne of Green Gables, the entire series. Again, back in the day when Blockbuster was open, we would go rent the movies as we read each book. And that was a whole segment for a whole year in my school, was nothing but Anne of Green Gables. That was my history. And we would read the book and then go to Blockbuster and rent the movie per book.
Well, there was theme books that I had gotten a hold of that had you doing projects and different science. I can't even remember some of the stuff we did, but there was
some of them
arts
were
and
baking,
crafts. There was baking. There was science projects. There was all kinds of stuff, all linked into the series. And whenever I could find theme books like that with the classics, I would always get them, and we would do a large segment of that series.
Yep. I adored Anne of Green Gables. I fell in love with that series, and today it's still a #1 in my heart. Kristen White is another good one she's in the YA category, YA fantasy, and she has a series out on Dracula being retold. It is a female heir, not a male heir. And so Dracula is a female, and that is really good. I love that. I do have 2 comic strips to finish off with, and that is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. It is a little graphic. I will openly tell you that. There is plenty of blood and other stuff in the comic strip, so if you don't feel comfortable reading that, please don't. But I absolutely have fallen in love with the first one. I'm ready to read the rest. And then my last one is Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is done by multiple different authors, so I'm not even going to try to list everybody in there. But I fell in love with the comics, or the cartoons, when I was in school. That would be like my treat after school. I would be able to watch Avatar: The Last Airbender after school, after I got all my homework and chores done, and I'd be able to watch all the cartoons, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And when I realized that there was comic strips out for it, and then now there are starting to be some books out telling backstories of some of the characters that we haven't really been introduced or have stories told about them, I am quite in hog heaven about that. So
Okay, does that finish up your list?
I do believe so, because everybody else is kind of both. That I have some that are both for her and I, so I just kind of let her put that on her side.
I'll tell you what, because this took a little bit longer than what we anticipated, we're going to split this up into 2 videos, folks. So stay tuned for mine. This is part 1. Part 2 will be coming up. We're going to go ahead and just tape now, and we'll